name is Tori Thomas, and I am the Community and Government Affairs Manager here at the Boise Chamber and also your host for today's event. The Boise Metro Chamber is Idaho's only 5-star accredited chamber and represents more than 1,900 businesses. We are only able to provide current events and educational content because of our members and their investment in our community. Before I introduce these wonderful panelists for today, I want to thank Optum Idaho for their generous support. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and we couldn't think of a better sponsor for their series and especially this episode. Optum Idaho serves Idaho Medicaid members who need outpatient behavioral and mental health services. Behavioral and mental health includes everything from depression to substance use disorders to emotional crisis. No one needs to suffer alone or go without help, and that's just one of the many ways Optum Idaho impacts our community. They're also doing mental health first aid trainings that are free to all Idaho residents. So if you are interested in participating in those trainings, you can check out Optum Idaho's website and learn a little bit more about that. So without further ado, we'll do a quick video from our sponsor.
There are so many beautiful places in rural Idaho, but living in these lower populated areas can sometimes mean limited access to mental health resources. To help, Optum and Hello Idaho are now offering free mental health first aid training for adults. Trained community members can be a potential lifeline for many struggling with mental health or substance use issues. To learn more about this free training, visit optumidaho.com.
All right, for today's conversation, we are joined by Representative Marco Erickson, Representative Brooke Green, Chief Ron Winegar, and Penelope Hansen. So first, Marco Erickson was born in Montana and raised in Boise, Idaho. Erickson has a bachelor's and master's degree in psychology. He was elected to the Idaho House of Representatives in 2020 and has been a lifelong servant in all things related to mental health and community wellness. If you're looking for Marco, you will find him serving his community and the state in several boards and committees to help as many people as he can. Representative Erickson, thank you so much for being here. Raised in Los Alamos, New Mexico, Representative Brooke Green received her master's degree in business administration and degrees in both communication and marketing technology. Representative Green is a 2011 graduate of Leadership Boise, shout out, and has been recognized with many accomplishments, including being one of Idaho Business Review's 2010 40 Under 40. Thank you so much for joining us, Representative Green. Chief Ron Winegar, appointed chief of the Boise Police Department in April of 2023, has a long history with BPD and the Boise community. He began his law enforcement career with the department in 1993, progressing through various roles, and received accolades for his bravery during a critical incident in 1997 when BPD's officer Mark Stahl was killed. Thank you for being here, Chief Winegar.
Pleasure. Thank you.
And last but certainly not least, Penelope Hansen is a licensed clinician and mental health coordinator for BPD's Behavioral Health Response Team. She was raised in Salmon, Idaho, and earned her master's degree in mental health counseling. With over 13 years of experience, Hansen has worked in the mental health field with law enforcement officers and members of the National Guard. Thanks so much for being here, Penelope.
Thanks. Yeah, at this point, I think that it was from when I started, because now it's over 20 years of experience. So there you go.
Thank you for the update. I apologize. I'll make sure to update the roster. All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate the time that you're sharing with us. So let's begin. We'll start with you, Representative Green. You are a member of the Idaho Behavioral Health Council and have been advocating for mental and behavioral health services for quite some time now. Can you give us an overview of the work that the council has done to this point?
Yeah, and thank you, Tori, and everybody. I'm excited to be here today. Before I jump into the Behavioral Health Council and some of the achievements, I do want to kind of give a quick overview of what it is and why it's so special. So I applaud the governor. Several years ago, he put together what we consider the 3 branches of government to address behavioral health in Idaho. And what makes us so unique is we're the only one like this in the United States, where they took executive, legislative, and judicial, put us in the room together and said, collectively, can we coalesce around a plan to advance behavioral health solutions and potential items and solutions to address behavioral health. And so that's how it all came about. And so since then, since the behavioral health formation, the plan, we have seen an $80 million commitment to behavioral health solutions in Idaho. So I'm quickly going to brush over several of them. And then, later on, there's some discussion about resources. And all of this enhancements in Idaho is a result of this Behavioral Health Council coming together. And I want to say it has been a privilege to be on it from the inception to where it's currently today. So since we've done this and this $80 million commitment, the plan is really what is driving all of our investments. And why I mention that is because oftentimes in the legislature, they will come up with solutions, they will bring bills forward, but these bills do not complement this plan. We don't do endorsements, but we certainly look to not, we don't fund them either necessarily, but we really want to fund our plan. And so 2022 was our first investment. And since then, we have done our crisis youth centers, which I will tell you previously to the implementation of these, we didn't have this coalesced approach to being able to provide for our youth. And so these crisis centers, they enable and provide avenues for youth to go to a safe location when they are facing crisis, either suicidal thoughts, and they can locate and go to these and have those resources available to them and feel safe. In addition to that, we have statewide crisis centers for adults and for our adult community, and being that I've been in a place trying to help an adult with a behavioral health crisis at the time. These centers are also to provide for that safe place that they can go to and seek these resources. In addition to that, I want to highlight our assessment centers. These are community-based resources. It was about a $6.5 million investment. There's 8 throughout Idaho, and they're all starting to become they're actually in the early stages, and we like to see and continue fund those in the future. But that was a 2022 investment. That we're not done. And as I mentioned, governor has committed to being able to ensure that we provide these investments into the future. And I could brush over several items that are coming down the pipeline in the future. But I want to tell you, we've got ongoing funding for our community recovery centers, our housing initiative funding, our crisis, our early intervention. Where can we look to get in early with some of these individuals and provide resources to them and take them out of the system? It's unfortunate in Idaho, and I've seen it firsthand, where the actual judicial system and the courts and the law, being arrested is the only way people are able to get access to resources. And so the whole intention of this is, can we get out early, provide some resources for these individuals and not have them enter the system? And so 3 branches of government coming together to make this. The Behavioral Health Council has been incredibly successful. I will tell you as a legislator, how many times my colleagues come to me and say, hey, I have this idea, will the Behavioral Health Council endorse it? And that's going to tell you something. That means that we're doing good work and we're doing it together in partnership with our stakeholders, our community resources, and all 3 branches. And so it's been quite a rewarding experience. I can't wait to see what we do in the future.
That is so amazing. Thank you for all the work that you do. And it's truly so cool to see just all of these resources, but then also all the strategic thinking that's happening behind the scenes. You see these resources pop up, and you just know there's so many hands on it. And so we really appreciate all the work that you do and the council does, and we'll be looking forward to more things coming out of that. So Representative Erickson, we'll jump over to you. You also have a background in mental health and specifically with working with the youth. Can you chat a little bit about what policies or initiatives you think could improve access to care for our youth individuals, especially in rural areas?
Well, specifically, we have to focus a lot on protecting the funding. That is our main goal right now. There's a lot of people that are seeing results, and then they're saying, we don't think we need these things. And I think it's very vital that we continue to support the mental health and all throughout our state and make sure that the funding is there to keep the people doing the work that needs to be done. So that with that, we have to protect our providers. It's very vital to because my background is I've had all the roles. I've been in the position where I was a provider, and then I was a company owner, and then the state government and now as a legislator. And so I understand the perspective of all and what it takes to keep that whole piece moving. We also need to continue to invest like we have with Project Launch in careers, because mental health and nursing and some of those shortage careers are some of the ones that will be our future kids going and serving right here in Idaho in their rural communities. And those projects are investments in our future right now. And so we may not always see the results until a few years down the line, but it's going to be a huge impact. Also continue to support those growing your own physicians and investing in fellowships in Idaho, and continue to do that so we could fulfill those needs in the rural communities. And so I'm going to continue to do that. And I'm going to continue to look at policies that other states are doing. I was with a group of legislators throughout the region last week while I was in Bozeman, Montana, through the National Conference of State Legislators. And we got together and we talked specific for health policy in rural areas. And we toured rural clinics. We got to see it in action rather than just, talking about it. So we're actively engaged in this work. I'm always trying to look at what other states are doing and then see how we can adapt it to the Idaho way and protect what we've built in Idaho, and also evaluate and enhance what Idaho is already doing, and then make changes when we aren't doing well. So when we see areas we need to adjust, we will also do that and be willing to make those positive adjustments so we can continue to serve as many people as possible.
So great. That's amazing. And your office clearly shows that you enjoy working with the youth. We love to see it. And I always think of the Jack Black quote in School of Rock when he's like, I believe children are our future. And I couldn't agree more. So I really appreciate all the work that you continue to do to, ensure these youth are represented so well. So, well, representatives, we're going to jump over to the city's perspective for a little bit. So we will catch you guys in a second. Feel free to jump in. But Chief Winegar, we'll start with you. There has been a recent shift in how law enforcement respond to calls involving mental or behavioral health crises. Can you explain how your department has changed its approach and how other law enforcement agencies are changing their approach across the country?
Sure, and thanks for having me, Tori. I would just say, yes, a recent shift, relatively speaking, but it's been a number of years. Well over a decade ago, we instituted crisis intervention team training in our department, and looking at the data as well as individuals, we know how important it is to handle those crisis calls where somebody is experiencing a mental health crisis differently than we would handle a normal or otherwise routine criminal type call. And so we have found it necessary and important for us to have all those principles identified in the crisis intervention team training implemented here. And so we have done that as a matter of course over a number of years, and in fact made it mandatory training for all officers. And we are well on our way to getting to our goal of 100% of our officers having been through the minimum training of 40 hours of crisis intervention team. We have also instituted a number of years ago a program where we pair a mental health clinician with a sworn officer so that they can provide services and connection to services for people in mental health crisis. And not only do they respond to calls for service in the field, but they are primarily tasked with going out and following up with people who have had an initial call for service involving law enforcement related to mental health. And so those folks are out there day in and day out doing yeoman's work. And we have recently doubled the size of our team so that we actually have 2 teams, and certainly look forward to expanding that even further in the future. But the approach that we are taking, I think, is somewhat unique, where we pair a clinician with an officer and go out. Some places are experimenting with just sending clinicians out into the field, and we don't feel that that's necessarily safe for a clinician to be responding to some pretty intense and sometimes emotional and even violent individuals who are in crisis. So we think we've got the right model. It seems to be working well for us, and I think others across the country are implementing a variety of approaches, some similar, some maybe a little bit different. But we see that as the future of successful interactions with people who are in crisis.
That's super informative. Thank you so much. And that's a really unique approach. And I'm glad to see that it's thriving so well. So Penelope, we'll jump over to you. You are a part of that behavioral health.
Yeah.
Can you share, we talked a little bit before we started actually about stigma and the seeing it reduced. And it's so great to see that these next generations are, it's not too much of a stigma anymore. It's people are able to talk about it. However, I think, now that we're able to talk about it, are we able to provide all the help? So can you talk a little bit more about access, and also maybe just a quick overview about how the behavioral health response team works with these officers and just kind of that process?
Sure. So I am in kind of a cool position right now. So I'm actually at a CIT, Crisis Intervention Team conference. And so I'm interacting with people from Washington and Oregon. So kudos to the representatives, because you guys are doing great work. And I think other states are having some real challenges, and it's nice to see Idaho really getting some traction and doing well. So speaking to the stigma, I think our younger generations are certainly being able to seek help, I think, better. Our older generations, I think, are still struggling with stigma in definitely certain demographics. So always seeing leaders in those communities stepping out and saying, hey, help-seeking behavior is good, you should do this. And I think the second piece of that is having medical models really integrating behavioral health, and hey, this is a medical issue just like any other medical issue. But as far as our team, so Chief was actually the one he was my supervisor at the time when I had proposed this joint having a police officer with a mental health clinician. And I've seen it done in lots of different places. They have different styles, but I feel like for our community, this is an excellent model. So my partner and I every day review the prior calls for service, and we go follow up on all of those calls for service where we have somebody that had a mental health crisis, and our team's really looking at how can we move this person away from the criminal justice system, and how can we move them into that medical model treatment long-term, because law enforcement is not, the criminal justice system is not set up to be compassionate, trauma-free. And the services, when you're looking at emergency services, they're timely, they're costly, and they really don't address any of those underlying issues. And there's certainly a time for those emergency services when somebody cannot make good decisions for themselves, they're unable to care for their basic needs, they are acutely suicidal or homicidal, and you need to intervene. But for the most part, we want to empower people to be able to get treatment on their own. And I think that leads to that next step, is that access to treatment. And I think this is where we're really struggling in Idaho with the shortages of treatment providers, is just we need to have that access, timely access to effective, affordable treatment when that person is ready to get the treatment. And I think that it's important for them to have those options.
Very great. Thank you so much for, all the work that you guys do. That access is such an interesting topic because, the stigma might be gone, or even the conversations are happening, but one, do people know that they have the access? And then two, are we able to provide all the access that they do need? So we appreciate the work that both of you are continuously doing. So jumping back over to you, Chief Winegar, you were talking about your approach and all the training that your officers do. Can you chat a little bit about that training, and is it ongoing? Can they keep it? How many times do they update it? And what's their protocol on de-escalating the mental health related situations?
Sure, we can talk about all of those things for sure. First of all, in the initial training academy for a new officer, or for an officer coming on as a lateral who has experience from another agency, they get an introduction to crisis intervention team training in the academy. Now, it's not the full 40 hours, but they get that exposure and introduction to, an explanation of, and the expectations of what we want them to be doing when interacting with folks who may be in crisis, mental health related crisis. And then shortly after they've had the experience of the academy and field training officer program, and they come out on their own, we then look to get them into the next full class, if you will, that full 40-hour training program. So my personal goal is to see them have that within the first year or two of service in the police department as they are out there. And then ongoing, our training academy staff and our training division really weaves in scenario type training through all of our ongoing in-service training, if you will, with all of our officers and personnel. So everything they do, from use of force training to anything they do, they are inserting scenarios where de-escalation and the opportunity to practice those skills is in the training itself. And it's expected throughout the entire career of an officer that they will embrace and utilize de-escalation techniques. Now, certainly if you're responding to a crisis situation where there is a threat to life, an immediate or imminent threat to life, somebody like Penelope mentioned is acutely suicidal or homicidal, sometimes force has to be used, and there is not an opportunity or time to slow things down and de-escalate if somebody's life is at stake at that very moment. But when at all practical and possible, we expect them to use de-escalation and slow those situations down, utilize all the tools in their tool belt to try to bring it to a successful resolution, and have the minimum amount of force necessary to bring the situation under control. So that's a quick snapshot, but that's our goal, is that the training is ongoing and incorporated or weaved into every type of scenario that we train on.
Thank you for that. One more quick question for you. Just got my brain rolling when you were chatting. I'm sure that while they're going through all of this mental health training, there's probably a lot of things on their mind. Do you guys have, I'm sure you have debriefs and opportunities for them, but do you notice within that training that they start to notice things about themselves, or is it usually more, after a certain situation?
Well, and that's probably a topic for a whole different day, but we have a wellness program that we have instituted recently and are in the process of instituting, but we've had a peer support program within the Boise Police Department since 2007, 2008, and there have been a lot of people involved in trying to make sure that our officers are taken care of and their needs are met, both physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and so forth. So there are some great things coming down the pike in the next couple of years as our official wellness program in the department is fully instituted and rolled out. But we find certainly critical incident stress situations are important, but there are a whole lot of other things, from administrative stress to just regular job stress, levels of burnout, working all the time, overtime, holidays, weekends, missing family activities, and those types of things take a toll. And then there's, not to mention, the financial stress, health-related issues. All of those things are important. And so we're trying to address the needs of the members of our department so that we can ensure they're in a good place to take care of the needs of our community. If our folks aren't healthy, mentally, emotionally, physically, and spiritually, then they're not in the best place they can be to address the needs of a community, especially those who are in a mental health crisis. So it's a multi-pronged approach, but we're trying on a lot of different fronts to make a difference.
Love that. Thank you so much. I mean, that's obviously a conversation for any employer or employee to have with themselves or with friends or with mental health professionals, because burnout is so real in so many different industries. So I appreciate that. And I appreciate all the support that you have for your employees. So, well, Penelope, let's chat a little bit about substance abuse and mental health disorders and how, they're obviously connected a lot. What strategies do you propose to improve coordination and integration between health services and substance abuse treatments in Idaho?
So, man, substance abuse is very complicated because there's also legality and crimes and different things that go along with it. And so, when our department was looking at it a few years ago, we actually had some officers that wanted to start a LEADS type program. And my counterpart at the department, Jordan Pereira, she's amazing woman. She started working with our officer, Cody Evans, and together they have an Idaho law enforcement diversion program through Boise Police. And so this program is actually looking for folks that have committed crimes, but really low-level crimes that are nonviolent, have not used firearms, are not registered sex offenders. And we're looking at doing a diversion. So once they've committed a crime, we essentially say, we will not send this to the prosecutor if you would like to join our program. And it's a voluntary process. And then we get them into treatment, and it goes for 1 year. And if they complete that 1 year of treatment, then we actually will just route that charge to file. If they do not complete the year of treatment, then unfortunately, then those charges are routed to the prosecutor. So it's an opportunity for folks to not have a criminal record, to intervene, farther back, and also just targeting folks that are users, not people that are traffickers, not people that are violent, but really looking at that underlying substance abuse. But I think when we're talking about substance abuse, it's it's not a one size fits all. This program, the Idaho Law Enforcement Diversion Program might work for some folks, but it might not work for other people. And I think you just have to have a lot of options. And I think the most important thing for substance abuse is when someone is ready to try treatment, that they have different options available to them, and it's time sensitive. They can go through any door to get it. It's effective and it's affordable, and they have access to it. And I think that those are especially around substance abuse, really important, because I think when a person is ready to stop and you say, okay, that's great, come in 3 days, you've now missed that small window of opportunity where that person is contemplating change, which is incredibly important.
Thank you. And you've mentioned effective and affordable a couple times, which I think are two very important aspects of this. And so I appreciate that thought that you have behind that. So before I jump over back to the legislative side of things, I have one more question for you, Chief Winegar. You mentioned again about your approach, which I love so much, and I'm so grateful that you have created this opportunity. How can other places replicate that approach? And what specific government support was needed when you started, or what do you feel like could be needed in the future?
So that's a great question. When we started our approach, there weren't a lot of other places to look to for an example. There were some, as Penelope mentioned, but in the implementation, I think what's really critical, and we are very fortunate to have the resources we have available here in Boise. If you're looking at other places in Idaho, if the resources are available, it makes it a lot easier. But if you don't have the financial ability to go out and hire a clinician as part of your law enforcement team, that certainly is understandable. But there has to be some way to create a partnership with a culturally competent mental health professional who understands not only crisis and mental health issues, which all of them should, but the law enforcement culture. If you're going to be partnering with them, they need to understand maybe a little bit more about the culture that we live in and that we work in, and how to best work together to address problems and issues. So is it possible to exactly replicate what we do in Boise in rural Idaho? Maybe not, but you can certainly take some of those principles and find a mental health professional that's willing to work with you. And then also the partnership with the prosecutor's office and with judges and all of those things are important as well. So there has to be a lot of behind the scenes work done to help people understand, like Penelope mentioned, some of these folks, whether it's the substance abuse issue or just mental health issues in general, they may be involved or have committed some criminal violation. And we're really interested in the root cause of that. And if that root cause lies in mental health crisis or issues, and we can get them the help that they need and connect them with resources that are available, then we can prevent future criminal activity. So that's a win for everybody in the criminal justice system, as well as in the community, in my opinion. So there may be some specific challenges, but when we started our program, we had to take into account all of those things. And fortunately, I've had great support from both the Boise City and the Ada County Prosecutor's Office, as well as somebody like Penelope who truly knows the resources available. And she has done a great job of throughout her entire career working with and connecting with all of the different resources available in the mental health community. So she's not a one-stop shop, but she helps connect people who need it with those services that are available.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, we appreciate all the collaboration that you all do, and it's really interesting and amazing to see all the behind the scenes stuff, or at least hear about it. So, well, thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. We are going to head on back over to the representatives, but if during this time, if you guys have any thoughts or questions, feel free to jump on in. So we'll start back with you, Representative Green. So Chief Winegar did mention peer support programs, and we've seen some promising results in other states for individuals with mental health conditions. How can Idaho better implement and promote peer support services to promote mental and behavioral health?
Thanks, Tori. Yeah, and to the chief and Penelope's efforts, I do, being a law enforcement wife, have a lot of appreciation for their peer support system. And I really think it's a really thorough approach to being able to help our first responders and being able to replicate that elsewhere. First responders have done a great job leading the charge on our peer support programs. As state representatives in the policy level, certainly being able to provide the funding to ensure that other like groups can come together, provide that support to their groups and to their employees is certainly something that, as a Behavioral Health Council, but in general, just policy-wise, is certainly well received and something that we would love to see throughout. You look to healthcare providers and everything that happened to them during COVID. They are like individuals. Their culture is similar. They work together. They really can relate to one another, and so being able to ensure that they have the funding to implement these programs certainly is in the best interest of Idahoans. But to our first responders, certainly a lot of appreciation for what they do. And I have seen firsthand, how those peer support programs can be beneficial to each of them, because in their line of work, it's incredibly stressful, and they need to be able to fall on one another and say, hey, I need some assistance. And so in a policy, certainly being able to provide the funding is the first place in which we can start to enhance those peer support programs. And, you have to look to rural Idaho as opposed to our metropolitan areas where they have all the resources. What can we do to enhance rural Idaho's access to these resources? And can they replicate, or can they get complementary services? That really is going to be imperative to ensure that these programs can be put in place.
Totally. Thank you. And sticking with you, you just mentioned healthcare providers. How can we make sure we don't continue our shortage with mental health professionals, and how do we attract and retain them so that we can ensure that both rural and urban places in Idaho are well taken care of?
Well, and if we only could answer that one and get all the resources we need, I will tell you in recent years, we have seen a decrease of available resources in rural Idaho, and it is becoming quite the crisis. There were some efforts policy-wise to enhance availability of these resources. Telehealth was one approach, and COVID really, when we looked back to COVID and what took place with COVID, it really did showcase that we can provide those types of services through technology to rural Idaho, because the reality is, and I've taken several phone calls from individuals where I want to get my child into resources, but either, at $125, it's cost prohibitive, or the wait list is 3 months out. And when you're in a crisis, waiting 3 months to get resources is just not acceptable. But if we don't have the employees to provide it and these healthcare providers to give this service, we really are hurting our Idahoans. And so there are efforts beyond the telehealth, being able to make that readily available and more robust, and being able to enhance broadband dollars to be, to implement broadband in these rural communities. That's one step. Other policy efforts we're certainly looking at beyond the broadband, behind the telehealth. It's what can we do to incentivize people to enter these fields? And so you see a lot of legislation move forward that says, hey, if you're going to be a counselor or social worker in this field, maybe we can look to reimbursing some of your tuition if you serve underprivileged, and underrepresented communities or rural Idaho. So we see that already with our healthcare providers for nurses. Well, shift that a little bit and be able to do that for our social workers and for our, counselors and so forth. Can we look to incentivize them to enter the field? Also making it easier for them to get into the field. While regulation's important, we certainly need to have it to keep the standard of care that's being provided. But what can we look to make it easier for people to enter that field and schooling readily available to them? Those are all policy pieces. Certainly, Mark, Representative Erickson, and I, are at the forefront of those conversations, and we've certainly have come out on several occasions supporting bills such as the telehealth, the broadband initiatives, and we can do better. But it's going to take a concerted effort and support from the legislature to see these policies move forward, to see our plan in action, but also to complement that with funding. If we don't have the monies, we won't have the programs, and we're not going to have the people to provide the service.
Thank you so much, and we appreciate all the work that you both do in the legislature. We'll look forward to a new session and hopefully see a lot of great things come out of that. So kind of sticking on the telehealth side of things, Representative Erickson, can you chat a little bit about telehealth and its impact on rural areas as well as urban, and kind of your perspective? What would you like to see differently within the telehealth and broadband world?
Well, it's kind of funny. Early in my career, I've been in this business, mental health, for over 25 years. So we didn't like telehealth back then, and we've come to love it now. And the reason is we needed that face-to-face component, but with technology and how it's grown, it's important. Representative Green mentioned a lot about the broadband issues. I've been in some rural communities throughout the nation that are still using ham radios, and that's something we need to fix. We gotta make sure they have good connectivity, good access to clinicians. And then we have the ability, when like a person in Idaho that's used to seeing their therapist goes out of state and can't, instead of missing an appointment, can still have the access to that appointment through the various apps that are available and through telehealth, and still see their therapist and not miss those services that are critical to them. So first, you got to make sure they have the proper technology to be able to access it, and that includes broadband speed. And then also the laws need to be able to cross state borders. And sometimes that's the problem when you have a specific funding source, that's the main funding source, like Medicaid. There's rules or regulations around that. So we look at policies that allow our people to cross state borders and use their licenses interactively, and that reciprocity from other states coming here and serving their kids and enrolling, make it easy to enroll as a provider. So we've done a few of those things in the last few years. Also making sure our higher level people are protected, like the psych extenders who are getting PhDs in those programs, medical doctors who haven't quite been paired with residencies yet have access in Idaho, and they can serve some of those rural communities, and we can get them paired properly with a residency. So if they're able to serve, it helps a lot. And then the telehealth is just such a great way now with technology advancements to see and expand services to those areas where they wouldn't have been able to be seen in the past. and it would have been a really long drive for somebody to see them. Now they could see somebody that's licensed, and it makes sense. So I think it's a great future thing for all of us to continue to expand.
I love that. I've actually done a ton of therapy sessions, and I continue to see my doctor through telehealth, and it's great. I mean, I think, yeah, your first thought's like, oh, you feel disconnected and there's barriers, but at the end of the day, it feels so good to honestly be in the comfort of your own home and to have someone that's undivided attention's on you and you're staring at them on the screen. So it's a really great thing that, COVID-19 obviously brought a lot of barriers and challenges, but I think the acceptance of telehealth has been really amazing through that. And I appreciate all the work that you both continue to do with that. So sticking on the same lines of expansion, we'll stick with you, Representative Erickson. The availability of mental health services in school is obviously vital for early intervention and support for students. Would you talk about some steps that could be taken to expand mental health services in schools throughout Idaho?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. It happens to be an area I specialize in and spent a lot of my career working in. And it's very interesting how unique it is to each community. And that's the important part to remember when you're dealing with school-based mental health. Every school board has a unique set of standards and rules that they operate under, building administrators and their opinions and thoughts on that. So I think it's real important to make sure in a community, especially if you want to expand your mental health in schools, you need to make sure you've got a supportive administration and a supportive board, because it makes the journey a lot easier. I've dealt with a lot of rural communities, and I've learned over the years, each one of them have their unique perspective. And if one administrator in a building is against implementing a school-based mental health, it could create a lot of barriers. Last week, I happened to be able to speak on a panel in front of 600 school-based providers and teachers and administrators down in Las Vegas. And I was grateful they recognized me as one of those experts. And one of the things we could do is recognize that there's different models for different communities, and you have to accept that, and the funding structures have to allow for that. It's very vital to let the communities decide how they're going to do that. And I can give you a couple examples. In some schools, they'll have it in the building, and they'll have mental health services right there attached to the school. Other communities will locate it on the campus, but have it be an external agency that's a part of that. They choose how to fund it in different mechanisms. Some are doing major grant funding. One of the things I hear a lot is Medicaid funding, and I don't want Medicaid to be the sole way to drive funding sources for school-based mental health. The other thing that I've seen some communities in Idaho do is they've been able to pass a bond specific to the mental health in schools, and not that much money, because they put a clinician or two, and then they get a really strong outcome for the whole year. So it just depends on the particular district you're in, and how the administrators and people involved in that process understand the outcomes that you're going to get and the benefit of having school-based mental health. So I think it's very vital that we continue to allow that individualized piece of it, and then also support with funding and policies to back them up in how they want to approach it.
Wow. Once again, so many behind the scenes factors going on. So again, we appreciate you, being the face of that. And that's really cool. You got to go to Las Vegas and be a part of that panel. So one more question for you, Representative Green. Chatting a little bit about the substance abuse and the disorders that happen with that, and kind of diverting them away from the criminal justice system, and you chatting a little bit about the council and the fact that it's all different. There's always different perspectives and opportunities for people. So can you chat a little bit about criminalizing people with mental health conditions, and how we can maybe get away from that and not only turn to the criminal justice system, but turn towards appropriate mental health services?
Yeah, and certainly, and Tori, this one is incredibly near and dear to my heart. And, unfortunately, an experience of why I'm, such a strong supporter of these changes. When we look to being able to provide for mental health for individuals who are at risk or substance abuse, unfortunately, the process to get somebody help, to navigate the system, the resources or lack of resources available, really put the only option available in some cases is the criminal justice system. And, being someone who's helped somebody try to get through this process, and unfortunately I've lost somebody because of, in my opinion, the system's so difficult. We lose good people, and all the efforts that have occurred in the last couple of years, I really want to say it is because we want to ensure people don't find themselves in the system only because that's the only place they could go to get help. And so, we've looked to addressing the civil commitment process, right? That was one of the first initiatives coming out of the Behavioral Health Council, is looking into the civil commitment. How difficult is it to get somebody help? And I know firsthand it's incredibly, incredibly difficult. And so we looked to that civil commitment process and said, how best can we approach this and be able to provide an avenue to divert people from the criminal justice system and getting arrested and getting help? Can we get them into services earlier? And so 2 efforts that are coming down the pipeline, and Penelope and Boise Police Department certainly alluded to this, was pre-plea intervention. Can we identify individuals because of behavioral health or substance abuse and not, individuals who are, felony type individuals, but individuals who could find their avenue to help? Can we get to them early? Can we provide an avenue for them to get care and take them out of the system? Another way in which they're going to do it is, those are low risk, high need treatment. Can we track them to a system to get their medicines and get their resources and get the counseling before we let them into the system? Because it is unfortunate and should not be the system where you have to be arrested to get help. I will take advantage of this opportunity just to highlight an effort that I have been working on, and certainly, Representative Markinson was there with me on this years ago. If we criminalize individuals because of the behavioral health crisis, which is essentially what we've done, I look to run a bill that address the mugshots. Right? If you get arrested and likely because of a behavioral health or substance issue, how in the world are you going to re-enter the system and re-enter community when you've got a mugshot floating around, right? It's very difficult when you have a mugshot to look at that at the worst moment in your life. You've been arrested because of a mental health break or some sort of behavioral health crisis, and now you have got this mugshot that's going to follow you around. If that mugshot's out there, how are we getting in front of people in the pre-intervention efforts if that mugshot is still in existence? And so Representative Erickson and I worked together to run a bill several years ago to address the use of a mugshot in Idaho. It passed the House 100% unanimous support. And unfortunately, a chairman on the Senate side drored the bill at the request of certain stakeholders and law enforcement supporters. And, I look to that as says, if we cannot provide an avenue for people to get help and to have that moment to seek help because of their criminal justice, if we're using that as a track to get them help, we're doing little to help them re-enter our community. And so I took advantage of this opportunity to talk about that, because that is one opportunity we can provide our members, our vulnerable population, is the privacy to get help in their mental health crisis and not to turn it into entertainment. So with that being said, I think that there's many, many opportunities in the future moving forward, and I certainly am going to be standing side by side with Representative Erickson to address that.
Thank you so much. That's super informative, and it's bittersweet that something so personal has inspired you to do the work that you do, but we are appreciative of all the things that you do. And I was actually just talking to a friend of mine. She's a lawyer. I always have to put in that I have a lawyer friend, but we were having this great conversation in Bitter Creek the other day, shout out Bitter Creek, I guess. And just talking about that and talking about the opportunities that can be created to ensure that, if something does happen, people have the opportunity to correct it and to not feel like they're just thrown into something that maybe they don't need to be in, and maybe they can correct it with extra help. So I appreciate the work, and as a government affairs manager for the chamber, I am excited to continue working with both of you this next session, and hope to see some really great changes. So we will kind of jump it back to the city side, or keep everyone here. Chief and Penelope, do you have any thoughts on, from a city's perspective or county perspective, anything that you would like to respond to the representatives with, or any last words?
So actually, I want to thank the representatives for the changes in the mental health code that happened this last year. There was two significant changes that around grave disability that have been incredibly helpful for the individuals that we interact with. The one, essentially, that this person's behavior due to their mental health is making them so vulnerable that they can't keep themselves safe. That was added, and that was incredibly helpful. And then the second one is that this person, due to their mental health, can't avoid serious criminal justice involvement or law enforcement involvement. And I have to tell you guys, that has helped us just tremendously to divert people out of the criminal justice system, because these are folks that we're ending up with multiple calls a day on them, and previously they did not meet criteria for a hold, and now they do. And so it's been wonderful, and we've been able to get some people some help that we wouldn't have before.
And I'll just add my gratitude for the collaboration and the partnership in addressing these issues. Certainly, we have a long ways to go in the state of Idaho, and we have tremendous need. But to have people who are in positions of authority and legislative authority to address some of those issues and work together with the stakeholders and the providers to attract new providers to the area and just connect people with services. This issue is not going away, and it's not getting easier. So we need more efforts to work together. And I just appreciate anybody who's willing to step in and take action, and appreciate that from the partners that are here today, along with a lot of others that are out there working to address these issues for people, because they're very real and it impacts lives in a very great and important way. So thank you.
Thank you all so much. Well, it looks like we have just a couple more minutes, and we do have a question that came through. I will ask the question, and then whoever can feel welcome to share for a couple minutes. So if everyone wanted to say a couple things, that'd be great. She says, how can new public health professionals in the workforce assist in the improvement of mental health in Idaho?
I'll just take that. I work quite closely with public health districts all the time. And I tell you, what you could do is see what your community partners are doing already and find ways to support their work and enhance your work at the public health district, and how you can work together as a team to achieve the optimal outcomes for everybody. So the more we collaborate and we look at each other as partners in the work, rather than we're against each other for funding and other things. If we're a team, we all are on the same team trying to help these families get better and get well and support their mental health. If we view it that way, we don't look at each other as opposition. We are a team, and then we could figure out how to support each other's work, and that's vital.
I think with public health, whenever I look at whether you're addressing suicide prevention or mental health or substance abuse, you really want to look at a multi-tiered approach. And, it's not like one thing is going to solve this, right? It's going to take a multi-tiered approach. And I think that the public health professionals really can support the work of mental health by having those large messages out there that are in support of mental health treatment. Yes, working with representatives, working with whoever your local individuals are, and trying to figure out, hey, what is your guys' program, and what are the things we can do to support that, to get the message out, to push it out to a larger group of individuals.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Well, with that, I will thank you guys so much for your time. We really appreciate, sharing this time with us, and also just all the work that you all do. It's greatly appreciated, and it's noticed. So thank you guys so much. I want to quickly thank our sponsor, Optum Idaho, along with our media partners, Idaho Ed News, Idaho Capital Sun, Idaho Press, and Idaho Statesman. And once again, if you are interested in Optum Idaho's first aid or mental health first aid trainings, please visit their website to learn more. So have a great rest of your week, and thanks for being here.